Start now. Thanks.
Thank you very much indeed. And thank you very much for coming to see this session. I know it's going to be a little bit weird because I'm not there, so I wish I was. And I'm really looking forward to talking to you today about a little bit about functional programming, specifically in relation to UI5. So I've got just two or three slides just to set the scene, because normally if I was standing in front of you, I wouldn't need any slides, but because we're remote, I thought I'd just share a little bit about me. So I've been hacking SAP for a long time. I used to be an SAP mentor. I'm now working very proudly to be able to call myself a member of the SAP Developer Relations team, doing developer outreach and advocacy. I do a lot of stuff involved with teaching kids to code at different events here, mostly in Manchester, here in England, in the UK. And you can read more about me and stuff at that URL. I've written a few books, most recently one for SAP Press last year about debugging UI5 and Fury apps and so on. And yeah, that's about it. So this talk content is usually in the form of a 90 minutes hands-on. And of course, that's not going to be possible in this scenario. Not only because I can't do hands-on remotely, but also because we've only got half the amount of time. And I know that we're running a little bit late, so we're going to try and compress it even more. So maybe we're looking at about 40 minutes in total. So please bear with us. I'll take you through as fast as I can, but hopefully not too fast. If there's stuff that you want to look at again, there's actually a worksheet document that I created a while ago upon which this talk is based. And you can get to the worksheet from that URL down here. It's a bit.ly URL, qmacro-ui5con-funcprog, functional programming. So what we're going to do in this session is do 2 out of the 3 parts of that worksheet. So we're going to cover part 1, which is where we use the Explored app from the UI5 SDK. And there we'll take a gentle look at some very general functional programming ideas, the idea of list orientation, list machinery, thinking of things in terms of pipelines. We'll look a little bit at immutability. We'll dive into the concept of higher order functions, which sounds a very complex thing, but actually it's very simple. And we'll also touch on closures, because those two things are very closely related. And as we go through that part 1, we'll be using some ECMAScript 6, ES6 syntax. That's the JavaScript version ES6. And we'll be using the so-called fat arrow syntax just for making the code that we write a lot neater. Then we'll look at the shopping cart app, which is a demo app in the UI5 SDK, part of the demo kit. And we'll look at some code there that allows us to explore some more interesting, some deeper concepts in the functional programming world, currying and point-free coding. We'll just touch on those a little bit. And we'll also, of course, touch on a functional programming library for JavaScript called Ramda. I'm going to be doing all of this in Chrome with the Chrome developer tools. So, a little bit of a bonus, I suppose, is that there's no more slides after this. That's the only slide, really. So we're going to do everything else in the developer tools. So I've got my Adobe Connect chat thing here. So if there's any questions, or if there's anything that goes a bit wrong with the screen, just let me know in the chat, whoever's hosting this for me. Thank you very much, by the way. And we'll see what we can do. Okay, I'll start. So I'll get rid of this slide tab here. And we're going to start with part 1 and look at the Explored app. So for those of you, I'm sure lots of people will be familiar with the Explored app. The Explored app allows us to explore different UI5 controls. And we're using this not because we want to explore controls, but because it's got data in there that's familiar to us. So let's actually start by opening up the developer tools. And I'm going to make this as large as possible. Really what we want to do is have a look at some of the app on the left-hand side, but I want to make this sort of developer tools area as large as possible. If that is still too small, give me a shout on the chat. otherwise I'll proceed. So what we want to do first of all is bring back that master list so we can always see it. So let me just go and grab that. This is a split app, of course, so let's just go up through here and find the split app. There we go, we've got the split app there. And I'm going to say split app equals sap.ui.get core by ID. There we go. Okay, we got hold of the split app now. So now I can actually say, for example, split app.set mode stretch compress mode. Okay, so we've always got that here showing on the left-hand side. That's great. Okay, let's just remind ourselves of what the Explored app is all about. It allows us to explore entities, controls, and other things as well in the UI5 SDK. And every entity has one or more samples. So the number of samples is listed here on the right-hand side. So for example, here, the HTML entity has 3 samples, okay? And we're going to be playing around with this data. You know, let's just pick some data to play around with. So let's grab the data that's behind this Explored app here. It's in a model that's set on the UI. So we'll actually go to split app.get model. Now it's not the default model, the nameless model. It's a model called entity. Okay, so there we go. And if we look at the data, we can see in there that it's got this thing called entity. So we'll grab that. Okay, so we'll say entities, A entities. We'll grab that and put that into a variable called A entities. I think maybe one bigger, so we can see it a little bit better. And we can see already that we've got a ton of stuff here. There are 176 entries in this array, in this list, and that of course ties up to there. So that's good. You know, so far so good. Let's have a look at one of them just to see what we've got. I'm just going to pick one at random. 1, 2, 3. Object list item. Let's go and find that object list item. Let me just remove this filter for a second. Object list item. There we go. There it is. Okay, so the object list item has also, just coincidentally, has also 3 samples. Let's have a look at the data that's behind that information. So we're just familiarizing ourselves with this sort of structure so we can start playing around with it. So this entity here has a namespace. It's got a number of samples, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, and it's also got a sample count. So it's got a property in there that's an integer, which is a sample count of 3. So it's an entity that belongs to a namespace that's got a sample count. So that's all we need to know to start playing around. Okay. So if we wanted, for example, to say, well, how many samples are there for the entities in the SAP.UI.core namespace? So let's just have a look at what the answer is from the app perspective. So let's just filter down to the SAP.UI.core namespace. And we can see we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 entities. And across all those different entities, we've got 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 15, 19, 21 different samples. So let's work out how we would do that in a sort of normal pedestrian way in JavaScript, given that we know we've got the A entities. Oops, A entities there. Okay. So we'd say, for example, let's have a total variable, fine, and we'd say for var I equals 0, I is less than A entities dot total, I plus plus. And the great thing about the Chrome Developer Tools is that you can actually hit enter these days and it knows you're opening a block, so it's not going to sort of try and execute that and give you an error. And what I want to do now is, of course, I need another variable, entity equals A entities of I. So that's the ith one as we go through this for loop. And then if entity dot namespace equals, what did we say, sap.ui.core, then we want to say, well, add the sample count property value of the entity, which is in the case of the object list item, for example, is 3 to the total. And then we want to say, okay, that's fine, and that's fine. Okay, good. we've added them up. What's total? Ooh, what's going on here? Set the UI core, entity namespace. Let me just do that again. Let's try that again, sorry. 21, there we go, 21. So that's great. Let's just double check that. Let's just run that again and double check it. Okay, so what's the total? Hold on a minute, total 42. Let's run it again. Let's just run that again because it's, we want to be able to run that again and again and again. What's the total now? 63. Okay, so what's the problem here? What's actually going on? Well, there's a number of, I don't want to use the word problem. There's a number of challenges with this code and with the way I've gone about it. One of the challenges is that, what we can see here, total is being changed each time. Of course, because we've got a total variable outside the scope of this block here. So we're mutating something outside of the context of this little piece of code here that we don't even notice, okay? Also, we've got a whole load of variables already. We've got a total variable, we've got an entity variable having to change, and not only that, we're almost like doing JavaScript's work for it. We want to loop through the entities and do stuff. We want to add up the sample count property for those entities where the namespace is sap.ui.core. So it's very pedestrian. It's very sort of low level. It's almost like assembler, really. We're trying to, give the language a hint as to how to go through a list. Surely it knows how to do that without us telling it, without us having to say, we'll start at 0 and go until you've hit the length of the entities and add 1 to that and so on. Very, very low level. So let's try and do that a little bit different, okay? So first of all, that allows us to think about, or what we should start doing is to think about our data in the form of a list. Think of lists in general. You can do lots of things with lists, especially with some of the built-in functions in JavaScript. And one of the built-in functions, I'm going to use white space here to sort of illustrate this, is the filter function. And the filter function is part of a family of functions that work on lists, that work on arrays. And the filter function, like its brothers and sisters, like map, for example, sorry, not map, like find, for example, take as an argument a function. Okay, so we've got a function that takes a function as an argument. And a function that takes a function as an argument is called a higher order function. It's one of the properties of languages that are functionally strong, and JavaScript, being a multifaceted language, JavaScript is a functionally strong language. So let's go and build a function that filter needs to work out what we want to do. So what we want to do is to just filter down to just those entities that have the namespace sap.ui.core. By the way, we're going to build a function not using the old-fashioned sort of let's say we have an increment function x, and then we say, for example, x equals x plus 1, return x. Okay, that's a very simple function. So we say increment 1, 2, 3, we get 1, 2, 4. Now, that's a very long-winded way of creating a function. So with ES6 syntax, we can say increment equals x, fat arrow, x plus 1. So there's no curly brackets to introduce a block. There's an implicit return statement. So the last evaluated thing here is returned. And also, of course, we don't have the function keyword. And this here is the parameter that this function is expecting. So let's try that, inc, and it still works. Okay, so that's great. So we're going to use the fat arrow syntax version of function definition. Okay, so where are we? Here we go. We've got the A entities, and we'll say dot filter, and filter takes a function and it passes to that function an item in the list each time. So we'll say x dot namespace equals sap.ui.core. Okay, so what's that going to do for us? It's going to only return the entries in that array where this predicate function returns true. Okay, so we've already reduced it now down to those very 8 entities that we're interested in. We can see that by actually, if we wrap this by console.table, we can see them there. There's the names just there, global control, HTML, icon, invisible text, etc., etc. Okay, great. So while we've reduced it down, now we can just concentrate on the next bit, which is to actually add up the sample count properties of those filtered down 8 entities. And for that, we use a reduce function. It's in the same area as the filter function, but the difference is that it takes 2 arguments. It takes an accumulator and then the individual item of the list passed to it each time. And we're going to use the fat arrow syntax here to start defining the function body. And what we're going to say is, well, actually, the accumulator, which starts at 0, okay, we have to give an initial value for the accumulator, starts at 0, and then each time round, it gets passed an entry from the list coming in through filter. So this is almost already a pipeline. We can say, well, we want to return the sum of whatever A is plus whatever the value of the sample count property of the X of the individual item that's being passed to us there. Oops, sorry, wait a minute. Entities, console.table, get rid of that, sorry. There we go. 21. And if we run that again, 21, and again, 21. So already we're sort of moving away from the really sort of scary mutable state of different variables. And this is almost like solid state code because, you know, we know that it does one thing, it does it beautifully, it doesn't change anything outside its own scope. But we can do a little bit better as well. This looks a little bit specific, so let's try and make this a little bit more generic, okay? So I'm going to write something. I'm going to create a function, a helper function, called by, and that function takes 2 arguments, a property argument and a value argument. And I'm going to say, well, that function will return another function. So a function that takes a function as an argument is a higher order function. A higher order function can also be a function that produces another function as its output. So that's exactly what we're doing here. We're creating a function that takes 2 arguments, P and V, property and value, and produces a function that takes 1 argument, X, and checks to see if the property of that given X is equal to the value that we gave before. Okay, so this is the function that is returned by calling this function. So now we can say here, and I'm going through this very, very fast, I know, but if you look at the worksheet later on, you can look at this in a lot more detail. So now what we'll do is we'll replace this bit with by namespace sap.ui.core. Okay, and we can enter, and we get the same value, and it's all still working very nicely. This looks a little bit more like English. This looks a little bit more sort of what you want rather than how you want to get it. And that's a feature that I find a lot in functional programming, that it's all about what you want rather than how you go about getting it. Let's do the same sort of thing for the reduce function and try and make that a little bit more generic. Let's create another helper function called sum of. Okay, and that helper function, we want to have 1 parameter, P, which is the property parameter, and that produces, guess what, another function. A function in this case that takes 2 parameters, and that is almost what we have up here, which is A plus X. And of course, rather than a hard-coded property named sample count, we'll have the property here, P. And that works, and the reason why that works and the reason why this works is because of the concept of a closure. So the values passed at the time that the P function is called, the sum of function is called, are closed over and stored and available in the scope of this function here. Okay, so now we can actually replace this bit with something that's a little bit more generic, sum of sample count. Okay, so let's try that, and it still works. So this is extremely fast, I know, but so let's just go through it one more time before we move on to part 2. Think in terms of lists. A lot of data that you process in UI5 apps is going to be in the form of arrays, of lists of things, lists of scalar values, but also more importantly, more commonly, lists of objects, or as I like to call them in the proper terminology, lists of maps, lists of name value pairs. And think in terms of what you can do with those lists. You can treat them as pipelines. You can feed them into one function, and the output of that function you feed into another function. And you don't have to worry about clearing up behind you. You don't have to worry about telling the interpreter how to go about things. You just want to say, I want to pass this list into this function, and whatever comes out, I want to pass into this next function. And we can also remember, we should also remember the concept of higher order functions, where you have functions that take functions as arguments, and also functions that produce functions as arguments. So look how much neater and how much cleaner and how much more, let's call it solid state, this is. And the surface area for bugs has been reduced drastically. There's no moving parts here. It's all within the language itself. So just before we move on from part one, let's do one more thing. We've got, let me just remove this filter here. We've got a number of different namespaces. What if we wanted to count how many samples there were in each namespace? Now, reduce is a function that often takes a list of things and reduces that down to a scalar value, like 21 in this case, like the total sample count. But reduce can actually change the shape of data as well. If we wanted to do that, we could say a entities dot reduce, and of course reduce takes two arguments, a and x, the accumulator, and then the thing passed to it each time by the reduce list machinery. This time we can actually use a block, so we want to do a couple of things here. We can say, well, the accumulator for the value of the namespace of x, we want to add to that whatever it is at the moment, or if it doesn't exist, we'll have a 0 plus 1. And then we want to return a. Okay, and then we close that, give it an initial value, of course, which in this case is an empty map. And all of a sudden, reduce beautifully allows us to change the shape of that array data into a name value pair mapping of number of entities per namespace. Reduce is super powerful. Okay, that's all there is in part one. There's more detail in the worksheet, as I've mentioned. So we'll just spend the next 15 minutes, if I'm okay on time. That's good. Give me a shout, please, facilitators, if that's not okay. But we're going to spend 15 minutes just digging in a little bit more with the knowledge that we have now into changing and improving a little bit another app. Again, it's just as a sample, and learn while we're improving that app the concepts of currying and point-free coding. So for that, we're going to move to the shopping cart app, which is also from the UI5 SDK. It's part of the demo kit. As you can see here, I'm using a specific version of the UI5 SDK because this particular version of this particular app has some code that is exactly right for us to sort of start messing around with and modifying. Okay, so if you're not familiar with this shopping cart app, you can see here it's sort of a master detail. Actually, it's a master detail. I've already changed the mode of the split app so that we can always see the master here. So the initial master is a list of categories. So if we select accessories, say, for example, we see a list of then items or products within that accessories catalog. And then if we can click into that and have a look at the detail of that item, we can see a laptop case, for example, and we have the concept of a basket. My basket is empty right now, my cart, sorry. And then I can add this particular chosen item to the cart. So if I add that, and I'll go to the USB stick and add that as well, and we can see in the cart that we've got one laptop case and one USB stick, and we've got a total price there. We can go back as well. I'll add another USB stick, which is, so I've already got one in the cart. I'm going to add another one. And now, of course, we've got one laptop case and two USB sticks in the cart. So that's going to be important for when we start looking at the code, which is right now. So let's have a look at the code that handles this add to cart button here. In the interest of time, I was going to show you how I got to find the function that was the handler for the press event of this, but we'll leave that for another time because we've only got 10 minutes left. So what I'll do is I'll jump straight to the product controller. Okay, so the product controller is the controller that is related to this product detail screen here, and it's got a function called add product. Okay, and this function add product, it's an internal function, as in it's a function that's called from another function inside here by convention with the underscore here, and we've got this little bit of code here that we want to look at, and we want to improve a little bit. So that's all we want to do, really. That's all we're going to try and do. Let's make it a little bit smaller so you can see all the code. And we're going to use some of the lessons that we've learned in part 1, and we're going to look at another sister or brother of the filter function, which is called find. But first of all, let's have a look at what this is doing. Well, in fact, there's actually a comment here that tells us what it's doing, which is pretty amazing. So it's going to try and find if the product selected already exists in the shopping cart. So, okay, so let's have a look at this. Let's put a breakpoint on here, and let's hit add to cart for this USB stick, which of course we already know is in the cart. So we're here. O entry is null right now. Okay, so let's step through. I'm using my keyboard to step through with the keyboard shortcuts. So what we're looking for here, of course, is the product that's been selected just now, the USB stick, is in O product. Okay, there's the USB stick. And in the cart right now, we've got 2 entries. We've got actually the first entry, which was the laptop case, and the second entry, which of course is the USB stick. We've already added 2 already. Okay, we've got quantity of 2. So the general idea is that we go through here, and if we happen to find that, I put a breakpoint there. If we happen to find that, then we've got the knowledge that that entry or that product already exists in the cart. So we jump out of there, and we get to this bit where we say, yes, we've got an entry. Okay, so then if we've got an entry, then what we want to do is just add 1 to the quantity. Easy, okay? So that's fine, that's all good. So now we should have, of course, 3. That's great. Let's just remove these breakpoints for a second. And before I do anything else, I just want to move around this sort of if, then, else, just to make it a little bit clearer and easier for when we start coding. So I'm actually editing this code directly in this instance, this running instance of the product controller JavaScript module. So I'm just going to say if there is an O entry, then of course I want to bring this one up here, let's put that there, and then otherwise I'm going to put this bit of logic down in this block here. Okay, so notice I've got an asterisk here, which means it's unsaved. So I'm going to hit save. And all this means is that changes to this file won't save to the file system. There's lots of different features in developer tools that allow you to save it direct to the file system. I'm just saving it in this running instance of the shopping cart app right now. Okay, so let's now put a breakpoint here and add it again, okay? Just to make sure we haven't broken anything. So I'm going to say add to cart, and of course we haven't changed this, so of course we're going to find the O entry. And then I'm going to hit continue, and we should see now, 4 items in the cart. So we haven't really broken anything here too much. So let's now start concentrating on making this better. So first of all, let's just sort of comment this out and say instead we want to use a higher order function, and we'll say let O entry. I'm using let here because again it's part of ES6. A cart entries dot find. Find is very similar to filter, except that it will just find you 1. So, and the find function is a higher order function in that it takes a predicate function as an argument, a function that returns a Boolean, true or false. So, and of course, again, find uses the same list machinery. We don't have to worry about looping through the entries in the cart. We get JavaScript to do that for us. So we can say x.product ID is the same as oProduct.product. So it's the same logic as up here, right? We're just doing the same sort of thing as up here. Product ID. Okay, so that's fine. Let's save that and see if that does the same sort of thing. Let's add to cart. In fact, let's do something slightly different. Let's go and add a webcam. We haven't got a webcam in our basket right now. Good. Okay, so let's go and add the webcam. And here the entry should be empty. Okay, it's undefined because we haven't got a webcam. This hasn't come true. So O entry is still undefined. Okay, so now we've got a webcam in the cart. Good. Let's go back and let's add another webcam. This time, we can see that O entry is a map which represents that webcam product. So this has worked as well. So already we've reduced this manual heavy lifting and complex stuff that you have to keep tab of the different values of the different variables as they mutate and change all beneath your feet. Because this is a very, very simple example, but it still makes me go a little bit cross-eyed these days because there are things changing here and I've got to keep track of them in my brain. Imagine this, but on a bigger scale. So already here we've reduced it to something that's a little bit nicer, but we can make it nicer still. And for that, we're going to introduce ourselves to a practical functional library for JavaScript called Randa. Now, Randa's really beautiful. There's lots of really good documentation, and there's even a REPL where you can actually try Randa out sort of in real time in your browser. But what we're going to do here is I'm going to load the Randa library into this live running shopping cart. For that, I need the CDN-based source of the minified Randa library. And what I'll do is I'll go into, let me just carry on continue the debugging there. But I'll go into the console and I'll create a script tag, create elements, and it's a script type tag. And I'll set the attribute, the source attributes of that to this CDN resource here. Then, of course, nothing's going to happen yet. Let me switch to the network tab and clear that and bring my console up so you can see what's going on. Nothing's happened yet, but it will happen as soon as we add the script tag, or script element, should I say, to the document head. So I'm going to say document.get elements by tag name head. So let's get the head tag. There it is. And it's an array, so let's take the first one. There's only one head, obviously. And I'm going to append a child to that, and that child is this Randa script element. And as soon as I do that, of course, the document object model gets a new item, and it causes the browser to go and fetch that. And there we can see it. And all of a sudden, we have a variable in the global namespace, in the window namespace, called R. And that has all the different Randa functions, including what we're going to be looking at, which is r.curry. Okay, you can write your own curry function directly in JavaScript, but that's not really the point of this. So let's go back now to our console, and let's have a look at in fact, let's go look at the source. Let's have a look at what this is really doing here, what we're saying here.
DJ, just 1 minute.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, so we are currently running out of time. We have another session planned from 2:10, so you could wrap it up by 2-3 minutes, and we would request you to switch on your webcam so that we all can have a look at you maybe for a minute, and then we'll wrap the call.
Okay, 1 second. Yeah, I'll just finish up in 2-3 minutes, and I'll say hello to you. Okay,
yeah,
great.
Sure. Yeah.
So what we're actually saying here is we're taking a property. What we're saying in this logic here, we're taking a property. We're taking a reference property, which is the product ID that's just been picked, and we're taking, each time around the loop, we're taking the individual item in the basket, and then we're saying, well, let's make a comparison to say, well, is the property of X the same as, or the value of the property of X, the same as the value of the property for the reference property, the one we've just picked. And if we say here now, let's has say, we'll create a function which is a curried version of that statement, okay? And then we can say, for example, and the idea of currying is that you can take a function that takes 3 arguments, and you can call that function not supplying all the arguments, and it will return you a function waiting for the final argument. So I'm going to say is same prod equals has same. I'm going to pass it 2 arguments, and the 2 arguments I'm going to pass is the property value, product ID, and also the reference product, which is O product. And now what I can say is, let's move that down here. So I can change this into literally is same prod. So what I'm doing here is reducing all of this that I've commented out into something beautiful, something succinct, something with such a small surface area, there's no room for bugs because there's nothing moving here. So let's just save that. And if I run that again, I'm going to add the webcam. Okay, O entry, there it is, it's found the webcam. Okay, let's just go and add, for example, something we haven't got, keyboard, let's go and add a keyboard here. And of course, correctly, it's not found the keyboard in the shopping cart because it's not there already. Okay, so This is a very, very brief introduction. And the idea of calling this with no data and defining this function as a partially applied curried function, we allow ourselves to give us a function that we can call without any data. There's no data changing hands here in this call. It's all implicit. The find passes each time an entry from cart entries to this isSame prod. And the isSame prod is just this curried version of hasSame, just waiting for the final argument each time. So there we have it. I know it's very, very brief, and we have to cut this even shorter, from 90 minutes to 45 minutes to 35 plus a little bit. But I hope that this has given you, an idea of some functional programming techniques that you can learn about. You can learn more about them in the worksheet that I put a link to at the start of the thing. It's 21 pages long. So, go through that. There's a third section as well. You can and practice what you've learned that we haven't covered today. I was going to try and put my webcam on, but Adobe Connect is not allowing me to do that. So let me just stop sharing my screen for a second and see if it gives me the chance to put my webcam on. Select a camera, webcam. There we go, and start sharing. There we go. Is that working?
Yeah, it works. It works fine.
So Srivatsan and all the folks there, thank you for facilitating this. I know it's been a little bit tricky with the remote connection and everything, but thank you for everybody for listening, and I hope you get a little bit out of that and have fun for the rest of the day.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks a lot for your session. Anyways, we wanted to show you all the audience here, but there is
yes, please.
Yeah, just we could wait for a minute. We will be able to show that. Yeah. Oh, can you see the people here?
Oh, hello. Yes.
Yeah.
Hello, folks.
Oh, you can go on to
Thank you for listening. And yeah, have a look at the worksheet. It's got a lot more stuff, and it goes into it in a lot more detail.
Yeah, just one minute, DJ. We'll be presenting you momentum over the call. Just request you to wait for some 10 seconds.
Okay, no worries. I can wait.
Here, yeah, Nagesh is here, who will be presenting.
Let me just, I'll.
Yeah. Can you focus on that? Yeah. Yeah. Oh, you got it. Yeah, thanks. Focus. Yeah, that looks great.
Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot. Yeah, bye-bye.
Okay, bye, folks.
Bye,
Have
DJ.
a great time.
Yeah. Thanks, Nagesh. Okay, so without further delay,